But for me, using that really haptic process to kind of translate what it's like to be in this place that's so open and really inspiring in a lot of ways. But for me, that straight photograph just didn't translate what it felt like to be on the high plains. So I spent a lot of time in that kind of prairie, kind of working on that. And that's really what I think helped me feel more comfortable moving into more large format work, where I could just use that as another kind of segue into that alone time with a camera, looking at a place and trying to handle this in a more pictorial way.
You have a few projects on your website. This one was like right in the middle. You had one before it and then one after it, correct?
Yeah.
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 In the one after
Yeah.
it
So,
seemed to you went a little bit more abstract.
yeah. So, yeah, that room in a weird way was like kind of what started a lot of this. It was this time I spent living in Wyoming on the high plains where like I was working in a lot of different media, so I felt comfortable bouncing around, but I was like making these photographs on the high plains. And for me, I hadn't really experienced anything that was that vast and encompassing. And I really wasn't sure how to photograph it. So I found that I was making a lot of these pictures and really not being satisfied with what the camera was doing, with what I was seeing and feeling, especially as I'm like staying the night, camping for a couple days, just seeing like what this continental divide is like with the local ecology. And I found that like I kept going back to my sketchbook a little bit and just like making these really like simple notations where there might have just been a simple line drawing with like 4 or 5 marks that showed maybe where horizon line was, maybe where an interesting like glow on a cloud was at night, or some description of how the grass was blowing in the wind. And I spent a good summer just with those drawings thinking about, okay, is this just be a painting? How should I like address like kind of how I'm feeling about this place? So I kind of went back into the dark room, that kind of safety net, right? Where you feel like you aren't visible for this moment and you can kind of meditate on this idea. So I was using these drawings as a reference while creating chemi-grams, essentially a cameraless photograph using just the chemicals in the darkroom and photographic paper that's already been exposed to light to create these kind of images. And most of them are fairly atmospheric. It really kind of flirts with the sublime in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, where you have this kind of really intense like darkness with this glow coming over the horizon. But for me, it was just trying to like really spend time thinking, and it was using art making as the process for that. I mean, I think some of those single chemi-grams, because I'm not using any chemical resistance to kind of create marks, it's all through folding the paper, altering dilutions and temperatures of the chemistry, sometimes simultaneously mixing it. So my developer is being stopped by the fixer at the same time it's making contact. So you get this wonderful kind of chemical mark that happens with what hit where first. But for me, using that really haptic process to kind of translate what it's like to be in this place that's so open and really inspiring in a lot of ways. But for me, that straight photograph just didn't translate what it felt like to be on the high plains. So I spent a lot of time in that kind of prairie, kind of working on that. And that's really what I think helped me feel more comfortable moving into more large format work, where I could just use that as another kind of segue into that alone time with a camera, looking at a place and trying to handle this in a more pictorial way. And then that other series that's on there is sort of that
I
hopeful
like
like
how you
reprieve, right? Where it's
I like how you almost wanted to try to do that at
yeah,
first, and then you're like, you know what? Let's go to the dark room, see what I can do here. Do you
yeah,
want to take an opportunity to kind of show some of these?
yeah, absolutely. Let me just pull up the website. Yeah, so they're all fairly small in size, not that much bigger than they appear on the screen here, which for me was really important. I wanted this really intimate object that really kind of showed like what it would be like to perceive like just as an individual in an encompassing space. So, and like we get little like highlights in the work, literally from like taking the paper and like bending it as it was drying, so it would tear just ever so slightly. Really kind of leaning into just like how dark something can be. Um,
And so you're getting these by folding
Yeah, so I'm folding the paper in half, sometimes literally ripping it in half in like the case of this last image where it was like I just wanted to exaggerate that line a bit more. And it was like, I feel like we get too precious with photo paper, right? Like we're always worried about denting it and
Yeah.
like, oh, if we like fold it too much, it's going to cause this crease. And I was like, but that's just like a little white part of the image. So rather than use like a chemical resist that would like not let chemistry hit that part of the paper, I was like, what if I just like stop being so precious with this and just let it like rip in half as I'm like developing it? And others, it's just as simple as like pouring fixer over one part of the image as developing solution is coming in from other parts. And often it's pretty diluted, but like fixer's pretty aggressive in removing silver from the paper. So it's going to obscure this area from like going fully black, and you're going to get this kind of clouding the way that like two chemicals that aren't fully mixed kind of create that kind of cloud in your like cylinders that you're mixing in. You start to kind of see those marks carry. But for me, it like really like was reminiscent of like the clouds on the high plains that just kind of go for the entirety of your horizon.
So when you were doing this, and that's the thing that really I'm intrigued by is the process is fascinating by all in its own because I'm a maker myself, but at the other end is when you pull it out and it's done and you're looking at this thing, you know what I mean? What
Mhm.
is it that
Yeah.
what do you feel like you captured there?
I think for me, it's like this moment, this extended moment, right? Where it's not just like that single frame of what I saw. It's like perceiving time over, course of a few hours on the high plains. Like, which for me, I think looking at these when they're like done and I'm pulling them out and I'll kind of pick one to kind of end on, like just settle on here. Like it's like looking at those like little kind of what almost looks like a flare of light, the way that you might see like light at night with like just little tiny headlights along the highway. And for me, it's like about evoking those memories and that kind of haptic feeling that you might feel in that place. Because it can be rather lonely, but like at the same time, like you feel so connected on a vast geography to everything that's around you. I think like when I talk to like local people in Bozeman who like are all about like climbing to the top of mountains, like they often I find our experiences are pretty similar. Where like you get to the top of that peak and you can kind of see just how broad everything is and how connected the landscape is. But for me, I just simply experienced it out on the prairie in the high plains of Wyoming.
Wow. So I know you like to think about images in space, and I know you think about them sometimes on a wall and how you would present these. How do you envision presenting these? I know you liked them being small and intimate. How do you
Yeah, I mean,
imagine
for
someone
me,
interacting with an image like this?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, it's like keeping this really small, quiet moment. Like I've always imagined it in like a just really like a very sparse exhibition space with just like a couple small images with a lot of space around it. So like you kind of are forced to look at these really minute details. Something as simple as like just those kind of tears in the paper, or like in here, like it doesn't photograph well, but like in the print itself, like this, there's a fold through here that like has the print raised, and just like how that curve of the paper kind of creates this darker edge here. And for me, I think having a more kind of minimal exhibition with that is how I prefer to show this work.
This could be a book too. Have you thought about it in a book?
I haven't. Yeah, this is one of those projects I worked on back in 2015, and then I put it away for almost 5 years. Like I pulled it out, I think there, like when the pandemic was kicking off, and I was just like, yeah, I think a lot of us were going through our archives, and I was going through old boxes from grad
Yeah.
school, and I found this box of prints, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember when I was just like making this, like back when I just like was trying to figure things out, and I was just like, wow, like this really like it brought me back to like being in that place. So I mean, I think the book works in that level of intimacy where you're just like holding this like small image in your hands and like immersing this moment with it.
You had mentioned that you like photography, not photography, but poetry, and you could definitely make a connection there with this
Yeah.
because it is abstract and it's based on feeling, and you're using that would be an interesting book.
Yeah, I mean, I find poetry is so useful for photographers because I feel like it's the closest art form to what we do, right? Like, it's like taking little fragments and trying to build more meaning out of it, which I think a lot of great poetry is like taking little fragments, sometimes repeating them and using different structures to create a much larger idea than it is, you know. Often I find I read quite a bit of it and it informs different projects.
You had said that this project kind of led you to do more large format work, and I'm kind of curious. And I know you referenced it a little bit in your previous answer, but I kind of want to dig a little deeper. How did this
Mhm.
kind of push you in a new direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think it forced me to think about space and spatial relationships differently. Like, I think before this, my photography, you know, it flirted with the cliche a lot. It was definitely very direct and like close up with the things I was photographing. Where, like, when I was making this work, it really helped me think about just like how broad and vast you can kind of approach something. Um, Especially like out west where like you have a huge horizon with just a few little dots of information in it and it can really convey so much more than just focusing on like hard signifiers of like, you know, this is a truck and this is a house and like it means x or this or that. You know, where now suddenly I was thinking about just like, okay, what does the negative space of a large open sky or a field convey in relationship to, you know, this dwelling? And I think for me, large format helped with that because one gives you those controls, but at the same time, it like kind of keeps you in that meditative process.
That's wonderful.